Pep Guardiola just wants this season to end.
That injury to Erling Haaland could be a possible problem.
Then the team, nobody apart from City fans wants to win the FA Cup. That's the truth of it.
Look, I've heard him say if he wins the FA Cup, it hasn't rescued the season, but it's not a bad, shocking season to have won the FA Cup and finish in the Champions League, is it? If they are able to do it.
Liverpool against Everton at Anfield this midweek. He's never won at Anfield, David Moyes, in his managerial career.
And if Everton get that first goal, then it could be very, very interesting.
Arne Slot faces an enormous test here. They're the worst possible opponents, Everton. It's a very different game with its own dynamic. So I think this is a real banana skin. It's a really tough game for Liverpool.
How are we doing, guys?
Yeah, really good. I thought the FA Cup lineup was really exciting. It was nice to see some unusual teams, some teams who had clearly meant a hell of a lot too, instead of the usual suspects. It was actually a really nice FA Cup weekend, I thought.
Yeah, no, I was the same. You know what I think about the FA Cup, Crookie. Don't like to talk about it too much, but no,
I can't believe producer Lucy hasn't mentioned on this of all weekends. You won the FA Cup, didn't you? I vaguely remember that.
Have I not told you that before? Here's the medal. No, look, actually, it's not because I was fortunate enough to win the FA Cup. It was because of how I grew up and how important that game was in the 70s and 80s that will always have my heart. So it was a really interesting one. I was at Craven Cottage at the weekend, and it was incredible because after 20 minutes, there's no way you'd have thought that Palace would go and win it, let alone win it 3-0. And yet I thought they were absolutely superb. So, yeah, brilliant. Really exciting semi-finals to come up as well. So we'll see how that one goes.
Yeah, we now know the four teams who will be heading to Wembley. Lots to get into today. We've got a full round of midweek fixtures to look forward to. But first, let's take a look back at the weekend's action and those all-important FA Cup quarterfinals. Yeah, we won't dwell too much on the quarterfinals because there's so much to play for in the Premier League this week. But we now know the semi-final makeup. It will be Manchester City taking on Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa against Crystal Palace. Scott, you've mentioned you were at Craven Cottage. I think I was in the minority going into this game. I strongly fancy Crystal Palace to get the job done. Didn't necessarily expect them to get it done with so much ease. How disappointed were Fulham and Marco Silva at the end of that game?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in the last pod we did that I said I fancied Palace of this one, but the closer you got to it, I'm thinking, and looking at how informed Fulham were, you sort of think if this could go all the way to penalties. And actually after the first, as I say, 20, 30 minutes, Crookie, honestly, it was all Fulham. Palace couldn't keep the ball, let alone try and get a shot on or off target. And I was just saying, sometimes in those situations, it's not about scoring. It's just trying to make sure that you don't concede. Eberechi Eze, I mean, what a player. I mean, you just want to see a little bit more of it from him, but he's capable of just special moments, and he completely changed the game. And once it was bang, bang, 2-0, their game management was superb, and Fulham could have been playing another 90 minutes in the end, and they wouldn't have scored. So, yes, I think Marco Silva would be disappointed. There's absolutely a shout that Adam Wharton was lucky to have stayed on the pitch, and that could well have made a big difference. But I thought Palace was superb, especially once they went 1-0 up.
They'll play Villa in the semi-finals, Kev. Now, I didn't watch the Villa game live. I took the mother-in-law to Ascot races for Mother's Day. That's the type of son-in-law I am. But I was getting tennis. She loved it, absolutely. Didn't back a winner, unfortunately. But I was getting messages during the afternoon suggesting that Marcus Rashford's performance at one stage was poor, and that if he was still wearing a Manchester United shirt, the quote was he would be vilified. A couple of minutes later, he scored his first goal for Villa, and a few minutes after that, he scored his second. Do the two goals mask his overall performance, or was the initial critique a bit harsh, you think?
I think a little bit harsh, if I'm honest. He had a couple of free kicks that didn't work out, but I thought he was a threat. And I think what you did see with the first goal he scores is that ability he has to finish off a move, and he took the goal very, very well. I thought it was excellent play by Villa, actually. They had to be really patient because Preston were pretty solid up until that first goal. But Villa looked a cut above, as you'd expect, because Preston are a championship team and not one of the better teams in the championship. But there's a real ruthlessness, I think, developing in this Villa team. Camara was absolutely outstanding in midfield. Rashford took his penalty very well as well. And I think what Unai Emery has recognised with bringing in Asensio, with bringing in Rashford, these are guys who can help him now. They're developing a squad, they're developing a team, but these are guys who can come in with experience, with quality. Is Rashford at the maximum of what he can do? Absolutely not. But it felt like a positive step forward.
The other semi-final will be Manchester City taking on Nottingham Forest. We'll start with Forest. I felt for Brighton after this game. I think they got stifled, they got suffocated for a lot of normal time, but in extra time, if anyone was going to win it, it was only the home team. But Forest won ugly, I think, and when it went to penalties with Matt Sells in goal, I think you probably did just lean towards them for the victory. They've had a brilliant season, Scott, Nottingham Forest. Is it unfair to say they're not brilliant on the eye?
Look, I think if you expect Nottingham Forest, a team that many were saying would not just be in a relegation scrap, but would actually go down, to try and play open football, playing out from the back and that type of high-risk brand football, then it'd be ridiculous. So Nuno is absolutely playing to his strengths. A great back four with a very good goalkeeper as well. Keep themselves very solid and pace out wide. And actually didn't even play Elanga or Callum Hudson-Odoi at the weekend. You know, I was at the game against Exeter where he made lots of changes, completely understandably so. Got to penalties. They don't mind penalties in this competition at the moment, do they? So look, it's not pretty, but who cares? It's Nottingham Forest. It's not the Nottingham Forest of the 70s. It's the Nottingham Forest of right now, and what they're doing and the way the fans are feeling. I was at the City Ground a couple of weeks ago. The synergy between the fans and the players is something special right now. So they've got every chance of finishing in a Champions League place and winning the FA Cup.
I quite enjoy watching them in a strange way because there's something quite fascinating and old school about them. Having the way they set up, the way they attack with pace. I mean, Gibbs White is great. Wood's an old school number 9. You've got Elanga with that incredible pace, Hudson-Odoi. So they do it in a different way to how a lot of teams do it. And I actually quite like that. The fact they're quite happy to soak up pressure, play deep, hit on the counter. And it works. It absolutely works. And let's not forget, this is an enormous football club that's been on its knees for a long, long time. And what I thought was really nice, actually, was that in his press conference, Nuno talked about Steve Cooper, only really briefly. But they asked him what the secret of this whole thing was, and he talked about the bond and the spirit. And he didn't try and make out that that's only come from him. He said, when I arrived, the first thing I noticed was that bond was already there. So I thought that was quite gracious of him to kind of give that nod to his predecessor, who'd kind of set a lot of that groundwork and, of course, got Forest into the Premier League in the first place.
And, of course, if they do win it, then Nuno will succeed where Brian Clough failed. It was the one trophy that Brian Clough was desperate to get his hands on, the FA Cup, didn't quite manage it. They'll play Manchester City in the semis. Mixed bag, I think, from City at the Vitality. Bournemouth very competitive in the first half, albeit Erling Haaland's missed a penalty and 2 gilt-edged chances. In the second half, particularly after the introduction of Nico O'Reilly, the man of the match, who transformed the game for City, Bournemouth couldn't lay a glove on them. Were they somewhere near back to their best in that second half, Scott, City?
Well, it doesn't matter about what you do in a half. I mean, you make sure you win the game. But if you're talking about Manchester City and being back to their best, then you do it for a full 90 minutes, and they're still a million miles away from doing that. But they're getting the job done. You know, I've said before that Pep Guardiola just wants this season to end. We saw how many signings were made in January, which is unusual for a January transfer window. And there'll be a lot more, as you well know, in the summer as well. He's got a massive turnover of squad that he needs to do. So, look, I've heard him say if he wins the FA Cup, it hasn't rescued the season, but it's not a bad, shocking season to have won the FA Cup and finish in the Champions League, is it? If they are able to do it. And he made the change. He put a number 10 as a left back. It's amazing what left backs can do, isn't it?
It would ruin it a bit, though, wouldn't it? You know, this FA Cup season, the story has been the underdogs, really, the big guns crashing out, and yet we're in the semi-finals. City are there again, 7 years in a row, which is a brilliant achievement. I think they're probably favourites, Kev, even though that injury to Erling Haaland could be a possible problem.
Yeah, they're the team nobody apart from City fans wants to win the FA Cup. You know, they'd want anybody else, really. That's the truth of it. I actually thought the experience really came through in that second half. I agree with you. I thought Bournemouth were super competitive, exactly what we expect from them maybe in the first half. But I thought Gundogan, De Bruyne, all that Silva, all that quality. When you've got a team that's pressing you constantly, you need composure and you need the ability to play through it. And I think they found that at times. We're seeing Marmoush, who settled in really, really well. I'm not massively surprised by that because I've seen his quality all season in the Bundesliga and in seasons before that. Thought he took the goal very well, even though Kepa should have saved it. And I think actually in that particular game, we're seeing what is happening to Bournemouth right now because they're not putting together 90-minute performances. They're having a really good half or really good spell and it's not quite happening for them. But that might just be the next stage of their evolution. But yeah, I think you're right. I think City are favourites to win this FA Cup now, but they could get Nuno'd like so many teams have been this season. So, Forest they won't be ashamed of it. They will try and play their football at Wembley, dig in, and hope a chance comes their way and they can take it. Or if they have to take it to penalties, c'est la vie.
February the 15th, the last time Bournemouth won a game in 90 minutes. Of course, that's a little bit distorted because we had an international break. But I think it's a concern for Andoni Iraola that maybe they're running out of steam at the wrong time and that their European push could be on the way. And they do play Ipswich at home on Wednesday. That seems an opportunity to get back to winning ways. Give us quick predictions then, guys. Who's going to win the two semi-finals and who do you think will lift the cup?
I'm going to go Palace because I do back Glasner as a cup coach. Seen them do it before, so I think Palace will make it through in a very tight one against Villa. I'm going to go for Forest. Why not? Let's have Forest get through as well. I think Forest will stink the place out. They'll do their football. They'll make it really tough for City. And I think they'll sneak through probably on penalties again. And we'll have a Palace Forest final.
I actually think City, that was a big one to get past Bournemouth. I really do, after them having lost there early in the season. And even in their really bad run, they hammered Forest in the Premier League. I just think this might be a game too far for Forest. I wouldn't be surprised if he still even makes changes, Nuno, if he's not secured that Champions League place. I don't know, but I fancy City to go through. I saw Palace at the weekend and they were very good, in terms of game management. I think that is a 50-50 one, really. My head's, in a way, is saying Villa, but actually, after seeing Palace, I'm going to go Palace. Palace City final.
And I'm going to go Villa City final, just so that we've all got something different. And
one of us will be right somewhere along the line, hopefully.
I'm going to stand by Villa to win the FA Cup. There you go. Yeah. Unai Emery to end their 29-year wait for silverware. Okay, that's the FA Cup quarter-finals taken care of. Let's move on now to these midweek Premier League fixtures, and we'll start with the Merseyside derby. Liverpool against Everton at Anfield this midweek. If it's anywhere near as dramatic as the last Merseyside derby at Goodison Park, we are in for quite the night. And there's been a lot of transfer talk around Liverpool during the international break. We broke the story on talkSPORT that Trent Alexander-Arnold has agreed that move to Real Madrid. There seems to be confidence coming out of Liverpool that both Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk will commit their futures. We know also another story we broke on talkSPORT, Liverpool very keen to sign Alexander Isak this summer. How much of that noise, Scott Minto, might affect the outcome of this game, particularly when it comes to Trent, if he was able to be fit and to play?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. I'm fascinated to see how the atmosphere would be. It's the first game for a few weeks now, because obviously they weren't involved in the FA Cup. You broke that story. Should be award winner, by the way, but you will be at some point in the future, I'm sure, Alex Crook. I don't know. I think the match-going fans will be absolutely 100% behind everybody connected with the club. And I think they realise now there's just this left. It's been a shocking month, hasn't it, really? Shocking March. I mean, they were very average against Southampton, got knocked out of the Champions League and lost the Carabao Cup final. So they want to sort of just reset and go again. And I'm sure they will. But the next two games are very, very important for them, for me. It's Everton at home and Fulham away. And if they can get positive results there, then there's absolutely no danger. I mean, they'll win the title, I'm pretty sure of that. But if things were to somehow go really bad and Arsenal do win their next couple, it could make things interesting. But I don't see it happening, and I think the atmosphere will be good.
Kev, we always know that as a Liverpool fan, you always err on the side of pessimism.
Yeah,
they've lost
caution.
to Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. They've lost to Newcastle in the League Cup final. If they were to lose a third big game on the spin, would you be a bit worried? Would the open top bus be put on hold?
A little bit, because I still think there's work to do. I've got a lot of respect for Arsenal, and I think, you know, we have to remember that Arsenal still have to come to Anfield, so that's a factor as well. Liverpool, of course, are enormous favourites to win the title and should be for what they've done. But this mentally, I think, is an enormous test because you've had the international break. That's always awkward anyway because, you know, players lose their rhythm, they go away, and there are stresses and strains in that regard. Liverpool have got South American players as well. I just think as well that they were so poor in that Carabao Cup final. I think a lot of that was to do with Newcastle. I'm not sure Newcastle have had all the credit they should have had. You know, I think a lot of the focus has been on how bad Liverpool were, and I understand that. But this was a Newcastle team that was so fired up to win that game, so fired up to end that trophy drought. You could see that, and they stuck to the game plan and played exceptionally well. I think the PSG one is a different one in the sense that I thought actually Liverpool played really well over the second leg. I thought first leg they were very poor. The second leg, I thought they played a lot better and probably should have gone through, but didn't manage to get over the line. But Arne Slot faces an enormous test here. They're the worst possible opponents, Everton, because it's that cliche, but it's true. You know, not the form goes out the window, but it's a different game. It's a very different game with its own dynamic. You know, you've seen loads of times where Everton have been on awful form, Liverpool have been on great form, and it's a 0-0 and a really awful game. That's not even the case now because Everton have been great under David Moyes and Liverpool have dipped a bit. So I think this is a real banana skin. It's a really tough game for Liverpool.
Kev, did you see how sort of smiley he was there when he said maybe that open top bus parade might not happen?
Oh, yeah. Well, crumbs of comfort for him. That's all he's got left now. I mean, United, I guess, have avoided relegation, so that's something. That's something.
I was quite up for the prospect of relegation at one stage, believe you me. You mentioned Everton, certainly much more competitive under David Moyes. They've got a couple of big players back in training as well. Dwight McNeil, it was really important under Sean Dyche and Iliman Ndiaye as well. He's never won at Anfield, David Moyes, in his managerial career, Scott. Will that be in his head as he walks out the tunnel?
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to say that publicly, but he'd be desperate to do that at some point, wouldn't he? I've been in contact with him recently about something completely different, and he's absolutely loving it out there. He really is, and why not? Drawn a lot of games recently, but by that initial start, he's taken them away from any kind of relegation problems. So, what that means is that they can go there and the pressure's all on Liverpool. It's all on Liverpool. They've got to bounce back after what's happened of the month of March that we've talked about. So Everton can go there and just, if they want to shut up shop, they can try and do that. They can try and sort of build up the pressure for the Anfield faithful to be a little bit nervous if that's the case. And if Everton get that first goal, and they have been scoring under David Moyes, where they didn't under Sean Dyche, then it could be very, very interesting indeed. I can almost see Kev just getting nervous right now.
Do you know what I think he's done, actually? And I am nervous. Do you know what I think he's done, Moyes? I think he's taken away that feeling of restriction. I've got a lot of respect for Sean Dyche. I think he's a really smart manager. I think he is good at getting the most out of squads in general. But I think it became this feeling of, we're under siege, we're battling against the odds, there's only so much we can do. And it kind of that, not mediocrity, that's too harsh, but that kind of limited football, the feeling was that was all they could achieve. And Moyes got there and went, spent a hell of a lot of money on this squad. They could do better than this. And I think he just kind of gave them a bit more freedom, gave them a little bit more attacking structure. And, that's yielded results. And you only have to look at what he's done with Beto. I know Beto became a bit of a figure of fun for a while. This is a guy that has had double figures a few times in Serie A. That's not the be-all and end-all, but he was a goal scorer there. And he looked as though he was never going to score at Premier League level. And he's just made a few subtle changes, just built his confidence up a bit. Suddenly you've got a Premier League goal scorer.
Yeah, the biggest thing, Crookie, is that he's taken the pressure off the players. And we've seen at recent, managers coming in recent years where they've just about survived relegation. Then the next year they've struggled. Then they've gone, and then the new manager comes in and they've just about survived, but then pressure, and then he's gone. And it's been a sort of perpetual way of doing that. And obviously Everton fans just want it to be how it was back in the day with David Moyes, really, how much they'd love something like that. But the Goodison faithful, they are so passionate that actually sometimes that can be a negative when things aren't going well. And he just seems to have lifted that pressure away from the players. And once the pressure is away from the players, like a lot of United players, when they go away from United, suddenly the talent can now shine through. And that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, Everton 10 games unbeaten. Massive summer for them as well. 13 players out of contract. They're going to have a new sporting director in place. So fascinating to see the makeup of the team when they move into that brilliant new stadium at Bramley Moor Dock. The Merseyside derby, 8 o'clock kickoff on Wednesday night. But it's not the only derby this week. There's an all-London affair taking place under the lights at Stamford Bridge on Thursday. Chelsea against Tottenham live on talkSPORT. I think it's unarguable, really. This is a much bigger game for Chelsea than it is for Spurs, whose eggs are firmly all in the Europa League basket. But Chelsea looking to hang on to a place in the Champions League for next season. They are sitting pretty in fourth, Scott Minto, but that doesn't really tell the story of their recent performances.
No, it doesn't. And, this is where the real exciting bit is now, isn't it? The fight for a Champions League place. And thank goodness that it looks like that fifth place is going to be okay as well, because I wouldn't be confident of Chelsea finishing fourth. I'm hopeful more than really confident that they will finish fifth. I think it's so exciting that they're on 49 points and Bournemouth in 10th. They're on 44. So I'm not suggesting that Bournemouth are going to really get towards fifth place. But I think it just goes to show that between now and the end of the season, this is going to flip-flop. It's going to be like you, Crookie. The teams are going to flip-flop between each other, really. So, look, I was at the game against Arsenal. I thought they could have played. It was a bang average game. They could have played another 90 minutes, and I don't think they'd have scored. But they are where they are at the moment. And look, if you take yourself back to the very start of the season where they had about 45 players to deal with a new manager coming in, I'd have snapped your hand off for this. So let's try and get, from a Chelsea point of view, let's try and get behind Enzo Maresca and hope that he can do the job. Needs his big players back. It's as simple as that. Obviously, there was no Jackson or Cole Palmer in that game. So they need to come back, and Chelsea need them desperately.
Yeah, Nicholas Jackson has been back on the grass, Kev. I mean, will they rush him back for this game, do you think?
I mean, they may well do, but I think it tells you where they're at, that a player that was derided for quite a long time is actually one of their key players. And I really like him. I think, considering he came to Chelsea with a very short track record as a senior pro, I mean, you're talking about a guy that had a burst of goals at Villarreal, but, he wasn't like a consistent season after season goal scorer in volume. It's taken him a while to do that in the Premier League, but he affects the game. He's always trying to run in behind. He's always trying to make something happen. It spills over a bit, that enthusiasm, because he picks up a hell of a lot of yellow cards. But I like him a lot. But they spent £1 billion, and I know people will go, oh, here they go again, talking about how much we spent. But they have spent £1 billion, and you're relying on a guy who is a good player, but you need more depth than that. And I don't understand squad building still. I don't understand how you can have a situation where one or two key players missing can send the whole thing into chaos. It's mad the way they've put that squad together. Now, it might work because there's a lot of talent within the group. But I just think, has Maresca taken them forward that much from where Pochettino was? I'm not totally convinced about that. I don't know if the football's always that fun. You've had Chelsea fans complaining about, the possession heavy nature of it. I don't know. I still think they're relying on moments. They don't dominate games, I don't think. I still think they're relying on individual quality. I don't think they're quite there yet, and I'm not sure that's acceptable.
Kev, I could talk for hours about Chelsea, so I'll try and keep it brief. One, Nicholas Jackson, amazing story. Wasn't at a professional academy, so absolutely got a very short professional career. Two, what he can do, what he's capable of, what his potential is brilliant. And I think him being out for as long as he was out affected Cole Palmer as well. Because if you look at the stats between Palmer and Jackson when they were both on the same pitch, I think it made Cole Palmer look an even better player, as well as Palmer making Jackson look a better player. But you're absolutely right. And I was one of the very few who defended Nicholas Jackson last season.
You were president of the fan club.
Well, I just felt I saw potential there. I saw what he was capable of. But I still think that if Chelsea Football Club are fighting for titles, he's the guy coming off the bench. He's not your number one striker. And you're absolutely right. You spend £1.2 billion and you haven't got a world-class striker, a world-class goalkeeper, or a world-class centre-half. I genuinely think they're not a million miles away. If you get 3 senior pros who are very good, I honestly think they could challenge for the title. But my worry is they won't, because on an average starting 11, they're the youngest by 2 years per player in the Premier League.
But the whole thing's predicated on this idea that we're getting all this talent from all around the world. And I'm all for that. Andre Santos has been brilliant for Strasbourg. I tell you, that Strasbourg team's great under Rossignol. They've been absolutely superb. That's all lovely. You're bringing in, Estevao, who's one of the most exciting players in world football. Kendry Páez is going to come in. This is all great. But it's a project at a club where a project has never been accepted. You've had 2 decades of boom and bust where you've gone, the manager's lost 3 games in a row. He's out. We'll bring the next guy in. We won the Champions League. This is what Chelsea is. This is what Chelsea has been for a long, long time. And then you're saying, right, well, okay, we'll have a project and we're going to build and we're going to do this. We're going to do it under Graham Potter. It didn't go very well. He's gone. We're going to do it under Pochettino. It didn't do very well. He's gone. It's a really odd fit. It doesn't quite fit. So I'll be really interested to see if they can do it in the long term, if they actually stay the course and say, okay, we want to get in the Champions League, but if we don't do it, we won't panic. It just doesn't mesh for me. The idea of the project, but the actual club it's being done at.
No, absolutely. I know we should talk Spurs as well, Crookie, but how long are they going to kick the can down the road and look to the future all the time? When is it going to be about the here and now and trying to get those right players in to win the trophies here and now? That's my biggest issue. So the summer's going to be really, really important. But my worry is they're going to keep on going for young, foreign talent, potential. And again, they're going to be another 2 or 3 years away from winning the Premier League.
We will come on to Spurs, but just to finish on Chelsea, April is a massive month for them because you get into May, their final 4 games of the season, Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Manchester United at home, and then they go to Forest on the final day of the season. Now, it isn't beyond the realms of fantasy. That Forest game could be a shootout for a Champions League place. So they need points on the board. I'd suggest, Kev, that Tottenham are the perfect opponent for Chelsea. Ange Postecoglou has not picked up a single point in this London derby. And I think if you look at his decline, you can trace it back to that game fairly early last season. They were hammered 4-0. They 2 players sent off, and he still persisted with this high line. I'm not sure Tottenham have ever recovered from that.
Well, I just think we've had the injuries, we've had players start to come back now, and the form is still a bit all over the place. And I just think when you're at the point where openly in the media, it seems to be Tottenham are drawing up a list of who's going to replace him. Now, I don't know what the truth of that is, but when you get to that
was our story, so I think you can say it's
well. There we go then. But do you know? Well, I do know what the truth of it is now. Then, if it was yours, then I'm absolutely sure of it. Look, but when you get to that point anyway, where are you at? Because the players then know he's not going to be here beyond the summer. He might not even be here in the summer, and just naturally, that kind of supply teacher thing kicks in. Now, I might be doing them a disservice. I might be doing Postecoglou a disservice, but it feels like a club that is running to the end of this Postecoglou project. I think that's a shame in a way, because I think when it started, it looked great. He brought that fun factor back after the horrible football under Conte. Although Conte is a winner, you have to say. He's showing that in Italy, getting Napoli into a title race. But it's just a shame it's really run aground. And if the players had stayed fit, maybe it would have been okay. Maybe it would have been able to see it through, but it's fallen away so badly.
It's a shame, Crookie. Shame for you.
Listen, I do think there's times when Ange could have helped himself, maybe won more friends in the media by improving his PR. And to me, I agree with Kev. I think the writing is on the wall. I think there's every chance that they make an approach for Andoni Iraola, and then he'll have a big decision to make whether he leaves Bournemouth or not. Let's move on to another game on Wednesday night. Forest against Manchester United. Forest, of course, went all the way to extra time and pens in their FA Cup quarter-final. They're 17 points ahead of United. What are we expecting here, Scott?
I think we're expecting a full-strength Forest side that we didn't see at the weekend. Although, how's Chris Wood? Do we know about his injury, whether he'll be okay or not? I don't know about that. I think he's a big blow when he's not playing. I mean, we talk about sort of penalties and in the FA Cup, but he's quite often not started in the FA Cup, and perhaps they have lacked that cutting edge. But when Alanga and Hudson-Odoi and Morgan Gibbs-White, are playing, then, this is what it's all about. I think we saw at the weekend that as much as Nuno turns around and says, look, we take each game as it comes and each game has its own merits, I just think he rested those players ahead of this game. And it's all about this game. And just at a time where Ruben Amorim wouldn't have wanted the international break, just it looks like the results and performances are starting to turn, they've had to wait a few weeks. So again, we said this at the weekend, we're not quite sure what we're going to see here because it's been a few weeks. So if anyone's been in good form, that might have gone. If anyone's been in bad form, well, it's a chance to reset.
8 home Premier League games unbeaten for Forest. They've drawn with Liverpool and Arsenal. If they're at it and they're at their best, this is going to be difficult for United, isn't it, Kev?
Yeah, I think it will be. I was very impressed with what they did against Arsenal, actually, because, again, Arsenal ran out of ideas really, really quickly, and a lot of the focus was on that, on the fact that, Arsenal lack a cutting edge and all of that, need a proper number 9. Actually, Forest were just super organised. Just made it played their game, made it really difficult for Arsenal to play through them. I expect to see that again. The funny thing is, Forest are everything that United eventually want to be under Amorim. Like a team that totally understands the plan, a team that has players in every position that fit. That's not what United have got at the moment. That's what it might seem ironic considering Forest haven't been back in the Premier League that long. You're talking about one of the biggest clubs in the world in United. But that's the gap at the moment because you've got a group of players that's totally on message and United still trying to get to there, and it might take them quite a long time to get there. But I agree with Scott. I think Amorim is starting to get those ideas across. I think they are making forward steps. I think they are starting to look much more competitive. They're panicking less when things go against them. And I think that's a really important mental jump that they've made.
Cookie, how do you feel where United are at the moment and this particular game?
Well, for me, it's all about the Europa League. I was just going to say they've got players coming back from injury. Luke Shaw back in training. Let's see how long he can stay fit for. Harry Maguire, Lenny Yoro back on the grass as well. I understand that Kobbie Mainoo isn't that far away, and there's a possibility that Amad Diallo, who we thought would be out for the rest of the season, he could play again as well before the end of the campaign. But I don't think he'll take any chances in terms of selection because it's all about Leon, isn't it, for Manchester United in that quarter-final, both legs live on talkSPORT. And similar to Spurs, really, the only way they can save their season is via the Europa League. I want to speak to you, Kev, about a player who's been linked with Manchester United. And my understanding is that this would be a sign that Ruben Amorim is really keen to make. Trincao, who Wolverhampton Wanderers fans probably don't have fond memories of. They're looking at him to play in one of those centre attacking midfield positions, one of the 10s in behind a striker. Is he going to fit in the Premier League? Because he didn't really last time round.
Yeah, I guess, and Scott will have seen him a lot as well, actually. I guess it's that physical aspect. But I think he's been great since he's got to Sporting. He's really slotted in, scoring goals, making goals, perfect for that 10 because he can float around. He's a really intelligent player. Not just he sees the picture, his movement's very good. I really like him. That question mark is there, but he's somebody that Amorim knows very well. And I think he would be a fit, actually, because he can be quite unpredictable as well in a good way. You know, he can come up with a moment and suddenly come up with a goal. So I like him, and I can completely understand that link.
Scott, anything to add on that with your Portuguese expertise?
Yeah, look, I mean, I saw him and he was excellent. He does suit that, one of those two number 10s. Those two 10s, you don't have to be exactly the same. Him and Gonçalves are two totally different players in a way. One's a number 10, one's a winger, but both can come inside and do the job and but also be comfortable outside. It's got to work almost. Otherwise, it's going to be another Erik ten Hag bringing his players, isn't it? So the pressure of going to Manchester United, I think almost for Ruben Amorim, as much as United fans, if he is going to bring someone with a club that he knows, I really genuinely hope it does work, because then if it doesn't, then he's going to get a lot of pressure. Amorim is going to be thrown at him a bit about this is exactly what happened with the last manager.
That's the real danger, because I think that really undermined Ten Hag. The fact that so often United were clearly influenced by what he wanted, the players he'd seen in Dutch football or the players he'd worked with. And when it didn't work, all his authority, certainly in the wider game, just seemed to leak away. It's why I was so impressed by the Dorgu signing, actually, because that felt like a signing that was actually, I'm sure Amorim had a list of what he wanted, but it felt like something that was happening with the wider club. Like, I'm sure Amorim would have said, yeah, he's great, he's athletic, he can get up and down, he could do all that. I'm sure he would have had that input. But what you want is you want to feel like the club can function if the coach isn't there. And that never felt the case with Ten Hag. It felt like it was all very muddled and it was all very... I mean, the fact they were linked with Arnautovic at one stage was just nonsensical. And I just feel like that's what you want. You want transfers that are a bit surprising. And I think if they keep getting linked with sporting players, because the truth is, and Scott will know this, as well as me, Portuguese football can be a really good watch and fun. But the truth is, you've got a big three, and then you are playing against teams where you totally dominate the ball.
Yeah.
And it isn't, for a lot of that campaign, you are competing with the other two. And you have your games in Europe, and that's fine. But it's an enormous leap. And some players can make it, and that's fine. But a lot of them won't. And I think if you're fishing in a Dutch pool or a Portuguese pool, that's a little bit of a worry for me, because you're always asking players to make a big leap. Whereas if you're taking them from Serie A or La Liga or the Bundesliga, it's not as big a leap.
Yeah, it's the beauty of the Premier League, Crookie. The fact is that every single game is absolutely full on. And you're right, you're playing against Porto and Sporting, big games, big atmospheres, 80,000 people there, the pressure on, difficult games. But actually then, for half of the other season, you're playing in smaller stadiums against where you're having 75% of the ball. So with the Premier League, it's just not like that. It's the relentlessness of it. So yeah, absolutely. United need to make it look as if they have a plan, not just the current United boss is in charge of recruitment.
Yeah, and I did see a list over the weekend, actually, of players who've come from the Portuguese league for substantial money and haven't really worked out in major leagues elsewhere. I think the moral of the story is that for every Cristiano Ronaldo and Bruno Fernandes, there's a Darwin Núñez. And on the subject of Portuguese-based strikers, Arsenal-Fulham is on Tuesday night, and we heard on Sunday evening Victor Gyökeres, another Sporting player who scored bags of goals over in Portugal and in the Champions League, in fairness, is very much on Arsenal's radar. Guys, can you make the case for that signing over an Alexander Isak or a Benjamin Šeško? I'm not convinced on Gyökeres. I'm going to put it on record. Brighton don't make many mistakes. They decided he wasn't good enough for them when they sold him to Coventry. When he went from Coventry to Sporting, there weren't really any big Premier League clubs at the table. I think this is a gamble, albeit a relatively cheap gamble. I think the fee that they're looking for Sporting this summer is £58 million, probably double that for Alexander Isak. Is it worth the risk?
I can understand why they would go for him, because he's somebody that I think has shown he can score all types of goals. He's not just reliant on one type of service. He can make his own things happen. He can go on rampaging runs, but he can also be a poacher in the penalty area. He's pretty quick. I do think he's somebody that can fit in. Šeško, so it's interesting you mentioned Šeško. Isak, we know, proven Premier League performer, fine, but big money, and as you've said in your story, lots of rivals in Liverpool very interested as well. So that might be a complex deal to do. Gyökeres, I think, could be less complex. Šeško's another one. consistent goal scorer in the Bundesliga, younger, maybe has that potential, tall, fast, strong. But Gyökeres has scored goals in the Champions League, has scored bucket loads of goals for Sporting, under pressure, doesn't just score against Rio Ave or whoever, he's scoring against the top teams as well. So it's a move I can understand if Arsenal make it.
Right, first of all, João Cancelo, Bernardo Silva, Ruben Dias, just to name a couple of few Portuguese players, people who've played in Portugal. So how dare you say that about a league that I loved playing in?
Bernardo Silva was at Monaco, though, in the meantime, to be fair.
Yeah, I know, but it's still from Portuguese football.
A proper league, the French league, yeah.
Look, and what I'd say as well, people develop in different times. You could throw Salah and Kevin De Bruyne. Why did it not work for them at Chelsea? I do agree. Alexander Isak is the number one target and one they want. But if you can't get him, what can you do? If you've had those conversations with both his club and his, I would imagine wages wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But if it's just not possible and not doable, then you have to look at a plan B. What it tells me is that Arsenal finally realise that they do need that number 9. So even if they can't get the perfect guy, they need to get someone as close to it as possible, whether it's plan B or plan C.
Just on the game itself, Kev, is this the perfect game for Arsenal? If they win, obviously it puts pressure on Liverpool heading into that Merseyside derby. Fulham, I'd imagine, will be on the floor after what happened in the FA Cup at the weekend. So surely this is a home banker, isn't it?
Depends on Fulham's reaction, I think. I think they'll be... I think you're right. I think they will be on the floor after how they collapsed, really, against Palace. They started that game so well and it just all fell away so quickly. So it depends. Marco Silva is a coach I rate really highly. I don't doubt he'll be able to motivate them. It could go the other way. He could say to them, well, look, you've had that game in the legs. You'll be sharp. You have to go out and show people now that you can save this season. And you can qualify for Europe through the league. And you have to go out there and show your quality. So Arsenal, of course, are more rested than Fulham. But it could be awkward because I have a huge amount of respect for what Marco Silva's done there. We've talked about coaches with a plan. We've talked about players that have really developed under him. And I think they've got that capability to do that. So Arsenal are firm favourites. I think they probably will win the game, but I wouldn't expect it to be a walkover necessarily.
And when will we see Bukayo Saka, do you think, Scott? Will he be on the bench for this game? And maybe they'll give him 20 minutes at the end just to try and build him up ahead of Real Madrid in the Champions League next week?
Yeah, look, I think he needs to play. If he's been training and he's been training long enough and he's making contact in that training, then he needs minutes now, doesn't he? I mean, I in my head, I always think a 45 minutes, almost like the start of pre-season where you have that 45 minutes. And the best way to do it is at the start of one of those halves. Whether it's the start of the first half or the start of the second half, you just say you can have 45 minutes, nothing more. When you come on, you're getting used to the pace of the game. You haven't done a proper warm-up, really, as much as you can jog up and down the touchline. And then you never know if the muscles are fully warm. So I'd personally like to see him get 45 minutes, whether it's the start of the first half or second half. But generally speaking, managers do put players on coming back from injury for the last 20 minutes or so. Bottom line, he needs to play because if they're going to get past Real Madrid, he needs to be 100% fit.
Let's quickly focus on another of the big games on Wednesday night. Manchester City at home to Leicester. Leicester, 9 points adrift of safety with 9 games to go. Kev, make the case for an away victory in this fixture.
I can't. They're really bad. They're really, really bad. I didn't know. We talked about the Van Nistelrooy appointment pretty much at the time. You guys told me how heavily it was influenced by the owner rather than the kind of recruitment staff. And it does seem like a really capricious, ill thought out managerial appointment. And it's heading for being one of the worst in Premier League history because he's lost almost every game. He's made no tangible difference to how that team plays. They're still really poor at the back. They still don't look like they have a cohesive plan in attack. I commentated on that game against Manchester United fairly recently. They just look as though they've lost any kind of collective confidence and they look like they're spiralling towards the Championship. And I'd be amazed if City don't win this and don't win it comfortably. I expect Marmoush will start. I expect Marmoush will score. And I just don't see how Leicester lay a glove on them, to be honest. So incoming, a Leicester 3-0 win.
I think we're all putting Marmoush in our fantasy team, aren't we? Particularly as Erling Haaland
Yes.
left on crutches and wearing a protective boot. I think it could be a great night for him. That game is live on talkSPORT 2 on Wednesday, 7:45 kickoff on the talkSPORT app. Speaking of teams doomed for the Championship, Southampton at home to Crystal Palace. Southampton making a very good case for their appointment of Ivan Juric being the worst in Premier League history. And on talkSPORT on Wednesday night, we got Brighton against Villa. That is a massive game in terms of the European places. Looking at the table, Villa 9th, but only 3 points behind Manchester City. Brighton a couple of points ahead of them in 7th. I guess the same question, Scott, is how Brighton dust themselves down after the heartbreak of a penalty shootout defeat in the Cup at the weekend.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be easier for Brighton than for Fulham, but I do think Fulham have a much harder test there. I think Brighton are a very good side, and we know at Forest, as Kev just said, there's lots of clubs this season have been Nuno'd, and they were one of them for sure. I fancy them actually to bounce back and win this game. I think they realise how still important this season could be. I think if you look at how well Fabian Hürzeler has done going forward, the way he's able to tweak things as and when. He's understood that some decisions and his plans haven't worked. But I just feel this might have taken a bit out of Villa as well. And with their Champions League coming up on the horizon, I fancy Brighton here.
No, I do too. I'm a huge fan of Hürzeler. I think he's done really well when they've had setbacks. He's generally been able to build them back up and find a way of recovering. I mean, you look at that 7-0 debacle against Forest and went on a great run after that. So I do think Villa, for the players they've added mid-season, I think they've got lots of good options, but I still don't think they're quite there in terms of being able to make lots of changes game to game and keep that level of quality. I don't think it's quite there. You look at a player like Marlon, for example, talented, never a doubt that he's talented, but the consistency has never been there generally in his career. So it's really difficult to say to him, right, okay, I'm chucking you in the starting 11 now, away you go. He isn't that kind of player that can just find that rhythm immediately. So I think it's really interesting then. They're fighting on 3 fronts and something's going to go somewhere. So I do think Brighton have got an opportunity there.
Not only has Kev given us a title for this podcast, but I think actually an idea for T-shirt sellers in the Nottingham area building up to the semis and the final of the FA Cup potentially. You know when you've been Nuno'd. There you go.
There you go. We'll all get a cut of that. Yeah. Absolutely.
It wants copyright for that as well now, Kev.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Absolute money maker. And he does love a T-shirt and a hoodie that's about there, Kev. So I think it's absolutely perfect. Guys, thanks for joining us on this pod. We've got 3 games I mentioned live on Wednesday night. Chelsea Spurs live on talkSPORT on Thursday. And we're going to be back on Thursday to look ahead to all the weekend Premier League action. Thanks for listening.